Hello, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. We have a mixed bag of promotions, sports, and entertainment value for you today. Phil, my plan for today's episode is to make the first two segments really dull.
Sweet.
Which is not usually the case, never usually the case. It's always completely full of excitement and life. Hi, I'm Connor Rubush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Welcome to Heavy Hands. Strange intro. But we have a strange episode here. We've got some last week's UFC warmed over to talk about. We've got some last week's Bellator to talk about in the form of Pitbull versus AJ McKee 2. We've got probably just a brief discussion of Errol Spence's fight with Yordenis Ugas from the weekend, which was, of all those events, easily the most entertaining and best fought of any of these fights. And then we've got a UFC event coming up next weekend with Amanda Lemos taking on Jessica Andrade, and maybe a couple other ones on there as well. I don't know. You know, it's going to be a main event heavy episode, but we've got like 4 different main events to touch on. So, Phil, why don't we dive in with, let's start with my boy Belal Muhammad. I feel like I had to rein myself in on this one. Cause many people were saying this was a dreadfully boring fight, and I did not find it to be dreadfully boring. If anything,
it wasn't great.
It wasn't great at all. No. If anything, Pitbull McKee was more boring, in my opinion.
Yes, I think this is unfortunately one of the dynamics of today's show is that, both of those fights were not the most scintillating in the world. I mean, I think for the Belal, remember the name, Muhammad defenders out there, I mean, because it's weird, right? Because we've been sort of banging this drum for a while, and he's been slowly and steadily climbing the ranks. And then the position that, you know, like you and me have been holding as Belal, remember the name, Muhammad defenders, has not necessarily changed to being the first people aboard the hype train position, but more the, why do you guys like this guy? He's a boring decision machine who is annoying.
Yeah.
But you know what? Fuck him.
That's right. Thank you for saying that first, Phil. What I was going to say is I had to check myself and find a middle ground. You know, because I was quite hyped. Seeing Belal Muhammad win a typically smart and well-rounded performance, a couple of shaky moments, but really a very solid showing from Belal Muhammad, strategically speaking, which is always the sense in which he beats people when he does. He just prepares a really, really effective game plan for his opponents. We have said this basically since we started paying close attention to him as a fighter. It continues to be true. It's a major reason why he keeps winning.
Yeah. And also, I think this is like one of the cruxes of why people find him irritating. You know, the one is obviously because he doesn't have, you know, big flashy moments or, like dominant finishes or anything like that. But, I think more than that, it's that he, more than almost anyone else in the UFC, he goes out of his way to find, people's weak spots and ruthlessly exploit them.
To keep his opponent out of the fight.
Yeah. And so he makes fighters, often ones that people like quite a lot, like Damian Maia or Vicente Luque, look quite bad.
Yeah.
He can make, like, and you know, in that, by that extension, you know, welterweight is considered to be, or at least was, you know, one of the sort of marquee divisions of the UFC. You can make MMA look bad because you can realize that even elite fighters have massive holes in their game that can be exploited just by a clever, smart person. Yeah.
And I do sympathize with the haters a little bit on this because the guy, you know, he made a fan favorite, understandable fan favorite, Vicente Luque, action fighter, look bad, but then he had the gall to make Leon Edwards look kind of good. Mm-hmm. So I can understand not being, not quickly forgiving him for, the gap between two results like that. But yeah, like it was clearly a bunch of, Luque fanboys, and I say this while openly acknowledging that I am a Muhammad fanboy. I just thought for a second that what if I was Muslim and that's how I described myself? I'm a Muhammad fanboy. I'm a Muhammad fanboy, peace be upon him. But there were a bunch of Luque fans who were like, this fight was awful, and it wasn't awful. And then my feeling was like, that was awesome, and it wasn't awesome. And the reality was, it was a smart fight. It was worth watching. You're probably never going to watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of fight.
Yeah, I mean, there's boring fights that you can watch because they are strategic masterclasses and so on. I've hyped up Rory McDonald, Tyron Woodley before because it's great to watch that kind of thing. But yeah, this isn't quite that. But it is still a performance where the general read beforehand was, oh yeah, Belal Muhammad can win this fight, but he's going to have to walk an absolute strategic tightrope. And this is something that we've honestly said before.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
About several of his fights. He's going to have to walk a strategic tightrope perfectly. And then he just went out and did it. And you got to respect that. Like, the same thing with Aljo last week. Was it the prettiest win in the world? No. But it was also like, that was how he could win that fight.
Yep.
And he had to execute it almost perfectly to do that.
Yeah.
And so we had one of the many things about this fight, which I think you called out particularly, is that, Muhammad is at his best as a front foot pressure striker when not pressure striker, but in general, just being on the front foot, pushing people backwards. He's not a hugely comfortable back foot counterpuncher, and Luque is relentlessly aggressive with his positioning and his counterpunching. And Muhammad had easily the best back foot counterpunching performance of his career.
Yeah, I still wouldn't say it was great on a tactic by tactic kind of basis. Mm-hmm. Footwork pretty messy. Pretty damn messy, in fact. Quite inefficient. Credit to Muhammad, as always, for having the stamina to maintain something like that. But yeah, again, with Muhammad, it's all about strategy. The little individual techniques don't matter all that much when they're strung together in such a logical way. And, yeah, let's go ahead and get into the particulars of Muhammad's game plan, since we've already sort of spent so much, praising it from various angles. Let's just dive into it. He essentially combined his fights versus Stephen Thompson, and with the fight versus Lyman Good, which we mentioned. Yep. That, he did a lot of moving around, a lot of darting in, rapid changes of direction. Basically the idea being, here's a big, massive puncher. My entire goal, as long as I'm on the feet, is to never let him set his feet in front of me. That's the entire basis. Just do not let him dig in and get off more than one shot at a time. And for the better part of 25 minutes, let's see. How much of this fight was on the feet? I'll look up the stats. I'm going to guess and say about
probably about half.
Yeah, 17, 16 minutes on the feet, something like that. For the better part of that time, he succeeded absolutely in doing that. And then used his wrestling. And we also talked about that. Vicente Luque, just not a great takedown defender to begin with. I thought did a very credible job getting back to his feet, which we also addressed last week. Didn't get controlled for very long periods of time, except for maybe one point in the fight. And I actually thought this was another moment, by the way. Every once in a while, I still don't hate Daniel Cormier on commentary. I think when Joe Rogan isn't there, he's so much better to listen to. When he's not just palling around. And he did have the very astute, maybe simple, but very astute point that Muhammad does not pose a serious rear naked choke threat. which was kind of funny because he finally picked up on that by the very end of the fight and was seriously working on one. But for that reason, Luque was able to just give his back whenever he wanted to get back to his feet. And he had an interesting comparison, DC, between the like relentless wrestling approaches of Muhammad with somebody like Colby Covington, who also never ever chokes anybody out, but does go for it constantly. Every time he gets close to your back, he is threatening your neck, and that forces people to respect the position and turn or concede top position in a way that Muhammad's wrestling game doesn't. So I thought that was a good point. It's probably something that Belal could stand to incorporate in the future. But his takedowns themselves were great. Well timed, didn't overuse them. I thought it was very effective how he sort of played them off his footwork and off of his punches, and also set them up well.
He did actually RNC Takashi Sato, I believe.
Belal?
Yeah.
Yes, I think you're right. That was in like the third round of their fight?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Somehow he doesn't try submitting people until round 3 for whatever reason. But that is also literally his only career submission. Wow. I'm kind of surprised by that. And yeah, his takedowns were well set up too. He absolutely understood and did his best to exploit one of the primary reasons for Luque's weakness to like reactive shot takedowns, which is that his first response to any threat is to just hug his head with both arms.
Yep.
And he used feints and used punches and came in behind them and had a couple of different methods. One was like a step behind, like tabletop kind of double leg. One was just a standard double leg. And I thought did a really very good job of setting up those takedowns so they came as clean as they possibly could when he got them. Not until like round 5 was Luque able to sniff some of those out, and it was at the cost of his own volume, which at that point in the fight had kind of started to grow round by round. And then in round 5, he kind of just fell off as a striker again because he was having to stop the takedowns. So definite continued signs that those two things are related for him.
Yep. He survived well as well. In the, I think it was 3rd round, Luque
got him with the left.
Similarly to last time, like clipped him with a left hook because he was skirting the cage.
Yep.
And then suddenly it looked like Muhammad was on wobbly legs. But, I thought he did a good job of fighting on the feet just long enough. Mm-hmm. He didn't shoot tons of desperation takedowns straight into a DARS. He just continued to try and fight it out on the feet and then went for the shots when he thought they were there. Mm-hmm. Ameliorated the risk of getting knocked out. It was just good, smart stuff all around. And again, didn't set the world on fire. I mean, in general, I think he's a fighter, weirdly, he's like Kevin Holland, where I'm just happy to see how far he goes in the division.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily going to be that broken up if and when he loses, just because it feels like he's been playing with kind of house money the whole time. It's
Agreed.
like you never even should have made it this far.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too.
I'll be fascinated to see if he could, I think he wants, I don't know who he would fight. It's presumably got to be either
Who did he call out? He called out,
was it Covington?
Covington, yeah.
Presumably they're going to try and make Covington Khamzat.
Probably. But I'd be cool with Muhammad Covington. Yeah. I mean, at least he went for it. I don't know who else they'd give him. Maybe give him Gilbert.
Yeah, that's literally the only other person. I mean, he's beaten Luque.
It's the only other guy who will accept the fight. You know what? Be cruel. Make Leon Edwards rematch him.
Yeah. Oh, actually, that is a strong possibility for what they'll do.
Yeah.
They'll do Khamzat versus Covington, and then and Edwards Muhammad.
That sounds fine.
Yep. And then
I would also totally be down to watch, as hideous as it would probably be, I'd be totally down to watch Belal versus Colby.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be
a super interesting fight.
A grimy, rough and tumble kind of fight. I if it does get made, I will not be unhappy with that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know it would be interesting to see, like... It would be genuinely interesting to see, like, how good is actually Colby Covington's defensive wrestling in a fight where he's not just fighting, Damian Maia and focusing entirely on stopping the takedowns.
Right.
I wouldn't be massively surprised
also
to see Covington get out wrestled or at least, give up quite a few takedowns.
Yeah. Well, also given his recent proclivity for giving up the front foot, it doesn't seem like it seems like maybe a better time for Belal to have that fight than ever before. Because when he does look at a matchup and say, ooh, I can and should pressure this guy, not only are the fights more exciting, it does kind of bum me out that people are like, oh, Belal Muhammad's boring. I'm like, he's only boring when he needs to be. The fight with Diego Lima wasn't boring. It was exciting as shit. Honestly, I thought his fight with Lyman Good was quite entertaining. He put on some really good fights. It's just, sometimes a good fight isn't the way to win.
Also, he beat Stephen Thompson much more convincingly than Gilbert Burns did.
Right, yeah.
And without punching himself in the face.
He did somehow heroically avoided that pitfall, that classic pitfall. Okay, so, it's always the case. There are two sides to every matchup. Muhammad did a great job with his game plan. Let's talk about Luque's side of things. Because, I think, given how well Muhammad stuck to his guns, a lot of what Luque struggled with here could have been expected. Was not outside the realm of, before the fight, you look at the footage, you're like, okay, yeah, these things will work against him. But also, he did some strange things. The stance switching, Phil. The constant stance switching.
Mm-hmm.
What was the story with that?
I think it was his attempts at tracking lateral movement. Because he was so plodding that he was at least like, oh, well, if he's moving in this direction, he won't get to my outside. He won't get to the outside position on me if I literally just change which foot's in front.
Yeah.
Because so much of this was like, you're like, wow, Vicente Luque is foot slow.
Yes. And that seems like a logical adjustment if you're not like a guy with one of the best left hooks in the sport who already knocked Muhammad out with it once.
Yeah. And whose main success in this fight was
with the left hook. Yeah, in fact, his only clever stance switch was when he walked in on that left hook was delivered when he walked in southpaw and then shifted through into the range for an orthodox left hook. When he was southpaw, I can't recall a single notable moment of him getting anything done.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they were just like, Belal Muhammad can't fight southpaws.
That is, yeah.
Listen to the podcast.
That was the other thing that occurred to me. That obviously they're patrons.
Mm-hmm.
No, it did kind of occur to me that they would also look at the footage and say, oh, Muhammad struggles with southpaws. He's also going to move around a lot like he did against Lyman Good. Let's combine these two things. But that is not how good game planning works. You do stuff that you're capable of, that you're good at. And if you're a guy like Belal Muhammad, where you're kind of not really, really good at anything, maybe there's more room for flexibility in your approach. You're a guy like Vicente Luque, I think your thought process should be a lot closer to, how do I get to do the things I'm good at? Because there are some things I'm very, very good at. Like pressuring a guy into the cage and then hitting him with left hooks from my usual stance. So yeah, I think you're on the money. He was clearly looking for the left kick as a way to cut Muhammad off, but it just seemed like a strange solution to a problem that didn't really need it.
It literally was just,
How about just practice stepping across and walking him into the... Go on, sorry.
The fight is a lot of Muhammad, circling the cage. And it's essentially if Muhammad goes left.
Yeah.
And Luque is typically happy to keep him lined up in orthodox. If he goes right, he's just like, how am I gonna catch him? He's past my foot. Like
he would instantly switch southpaw.
And then he would
just
turn to southpaw and then trail after him, and then just be like, oh yeah, I don't know how to throw any strikes in this position.
It definitely seemed like something that he prepared for, because he was doing that like Muhammad changing direction was a trigger right from the beginning of the fight. He would switch stance the moment he started circling in the opposite direction, which it just seems strange to me that he apparently spent his training camp preparing to do that instead of, say, sidestepping and landing your left hook that you're good at.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
it was very weird.
He was also, it wasn't just that he didn't look like a natural striker from southpaw, because he's never been a southpaw. He was more vulnerable too. His defense suddenly started to suck. There were many occasions when he went southpaw where Muhammad was able to just pop him with a clean 1-2, and Luque didn't seem to know how to respond. He also didn't have the counter triggers, which was a major reason that I picked him. It's that Muhammad's going to have to step in and engage to just keep that pressure off. And a lot of the times when Belal stepped in and engaged, I think he, whether like as a thought process or just because he felt that the position made more sense, it was when Luque was southpaw. And it worked. So I don't know. Strange adjustment, did not seem to play to Luque's strengths. But,
yeah, it's very sad, really, because, you know, Luque's, as we've said many times, has been one of the actual drivers of this division, together with, you know, Gilbert Burns and back before then, Damian Maia.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who will actually accept fights and fight below his ranking. And this was a real puzzler, this one.
Agreed.
But like he just generally just expected that the fight was going to come to him somehow.
Yeah.
And the only sort of adaptations were was this really, really sketchy, like, southpaw approach, which just seemed to be used to, like, put Muhammad in the sort of searchlight of his stance without anything to actually get him with.
Right.
Very weird.
If your attitude is like, I know he's weak to this, if that was part of the decision making, I know Muhammad's bad against southpaws. You really, as a professional fighter or as a team of coaches training a professional fighter, should have the thought, maybe he's not bad against the southpaw stance so much as he's bad against southpaw fighters who know how to do it. Cause it there's a lot of changes. It affects the fight in many different ways when you're in, an open stance sort of fight. It's a whole different thing. So you have to actually be good at it to poke holes in Muhammad's susceptibility to that. Anyway, congratulations, Belal Muhammad. Even I, one of your greatest fans on earth, will probably not watch this fight again anytime soon. But it wasn't bad, and it was a very solid performance, and I look forward to what he does next. I enjoyed watching it. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was well executed.
Lower stakes, which probably had something to do with it, but just on a punch-for-punch basis, more entertaining than the fight we're going to be talking about after this break, which is the Bellator 270...
Why did you even set yourself up for this? I'm trying to remember numbers of MMA events.
277. It's tough because they're so close now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the confusing part. The Bellator 277 main event, Patricio Pitbull versus AJ McKee 2, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're going to be talking about Pitbull McKee too. I should also mention in this segment, I think we are going to touch on Aaron Pico as well. MMA's problem child, the prospect that could be, that is, that kind of is. We're going to discuss his latest venture on the undercard of this same Bellator event. But first off, another mixed emotional event for me, Phil, because do I love Patricio Pitbull? Yes. Have I enjoyed many of his fights? Absolutely. Is he, and has he been for a very long time, one of the best fighters outside the UFC? 100%. Was it a good fight? No. Really not at all. Not even as entertaining as Muhammad Luque. But he did beat AJ McKee, which, good for him. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
makes a third fight more compelling.
Yeah, and what more can you really ask from Pitbull at this stage in his career?
Yeah,
I mean, again, in one ways he's the sort of in the playing with house money stage where I certainly didn't expect him to win this fight.
Right.
Simply for the fact that AJ McKee is bigger, younger, was going to be full of confidence, and Pitbull's been doing this for years now. I think Pitbull is still pretty much, I would say, not even really a particularly natural featherweight, although I don't really know how big he is, but he seems like a bantamweight featherweight tweener to me.
Yeah.
And the size difference was pretty pronounced.
Yep.
And so, in a similar way to the Muhammad fight, you got to be like, when you're up against horrible style matchups, you take the win you can get. That being said, it did suck.
Yeah. But respect to Pitbull,
and I think,
who is also an old man. You said he's been doing it for a long time. Just to put an actual number on that, he has now been fighting for 18 years and a month.
Ugh.
He debuted in March of 2004.
Wow.
So it has been a very long career. And I do think also, just to add to the playing with house money aspect of this fight, he is looking old. He's looking slower. He's looking much less capable of maintaining a fast pace. This was not a fast-paced fight, and he was still gassing in the later rounds. He recovered well, still crazy experienced and crafty and very, very good at what he does. But for an old man, I'm going to give him a pass and say, you fought the fight you needed to fight in order to win. And credit to him for that. And it ends up making the last fight look like a lot more of a fluke, really. Not that the same thing couldn't happen again, but it was really just one simple adjustment, which I want to talk about, which is just like basically not backing up.
Oh, now I've got to say, did you see the keys to victory on the on the fight beforehand?
Just tell me, did Big John McCarthy narrate them as they showed up on screen?
I don't actually know because I wasn't listening because I didn't want my brain to leak out of my ears.
It was bad. It did not
flee
help
the room in horror.
You had a more entertaining version
so
of the
it
fight
had
than me.
they had the sort of keys to victory kind of little sign pop up beforehand, and I'm trying to find where it is in the broadcast at the moment so I can relate it exactly. But basically, for one of them, it is for Patricio. It is his keys to victory are get McKee backing up, and one of them is take chances, but not too early. But the other one is keep McKee backing, make sure McKee backs up. And for McKee, I'm pretty sure one of his keys to victory was keep his back to the fence. So you realize you've given these two people this, if they both execute their keys to victory, they will have the same fight.
Great.
I was just What? It may be a typo.
Maybe it was keep.
I hope it is.
Maybe it was keep Pitbull's back to the fence, and the his was just.
Yeah,
that's probably what
true.
they meant. That's probably what they meant, because that's where he finished Pitbull.
I'm gonna
last
hope
time.
so.
Okay, all right. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on that one.
But yeah, I mean, as I think I said a while back after when were we talking about Pitbull last?
Probably the last McKee
I'm
fight.
not generally a fan of the way that his style has developed.
Right.
The way that he's really settled down into being just a single punch counterpuncher. He's increasingly become a kind of actually technical Uriah Faber.
Oh, okay. For a second, I heard Uriah Hall when you said that, and I was very perplexed.
I mean, yeah, they're just so similar.
Yeah, Faber I could see for sure. Yeah, what if Faber just cut out all the inefficient
coiled
bullshit?
For one big counterpunch?
Right.
But he's not going to risk anything else.
Yeah, that was very much the approach he took here. I think it all came down to, like, the reason I want to talk about this, one of the few interesting things about how this fight played out in my book is because I'm always, disparaging MMA, which of course it deserves. It's a bad sport. It's dumb. Disparaging it for coming down to the simple question of which guy comes forward. And that just kind of deciding things. And all too often, that is the case. The guy who comes forward wins. And this was an interesting middle ground, only in that Patricio Pitbull did not really want to come forward. But he also knew he did not want to be backed up. So this was an example, really, of just the benefit of standing your ground. That was really his approach to this fight, I think. He never took more than... I think there was maybe one occasion where for a minute he was like on the back foot and was kind of circling. In maybe round 2 or 3, possibly. But for the most part, he really just seemed to have set his mind on sitting in the middle of the cage, never taking more than a single backward step before regaining that distance, and just refusing to let McKee push you back with bullshit. If he's going to push you back, it has to be a genuine threat to which he has committed himself, so you can ostensibly do something about it when you retreat. And it kind of worked. It kind of worked fine. Like, we can, I'm open to critiques of how Pitbull's style has developed, but also this was a bit of a reality check, I think, for the depth of AJ McKee's striking arsenal.
It really was.
Which is, there's not that much to it other than like power and dynamism and size.
Yep. And just like a pretty basic, like southpaw changeup between the left hand and the left kick.
Right.
But, even that, like, deteriorated dramatically when he was forced into actual exchanges.
Yeah.
Like, when he was... Because he was thinking, like, this is the thing, in some ways, he possibly could have just stayed at that range, just throwing kicks at Pitbull every now and again, because, Pitbull's primarily coming in with like, the right hand. And the left kick probably just would have kept it at home in one way or the other.
He landed an awful lot of body kicks. I think in some ways his patience just... What's that?
He
landed an awful lot of the body kicks he threw. If he'd just thrown more of them. I mean, they kept getting caught, but there was nothing done with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was simply... It wasn't just a depth thing. It was a patience and discipline thing. Because Pitbull was so focused on fighting his fight...
Right.
That McKee just sort of got bored and fell into it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
He was just like, well, I have to punch with this guy now. I can't just sit here... kicking him once or twice every few minutes, even though that might well have won him rounds. Yeah. He was like, I've got to come forward and punch him. And then you suddenly realize, like, he's really bad when he does that.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of been
just like left his feet behind, like stumbling through space.
Yeah,
like he is not built to lead at the moment.
No, I mean, he's dangerous leading. When this is the sort of interesting thing, and all credit to Pitbull for this. You would think after the result of their first fight that, like, his attitude would be the opposite, would be reversed in the two fights. Because in the first fight, it was sort of like, this guy's big and dangerous, and he just gave him sort of intrinsic respect. Mm-hmm. It was like, when he comes forward, something's going to happen. I have to give ground. I have to suss him out first. And that's what caused him to, within like a minute, lean into that basic southpaw switch up that you spoke of. Thought it was a left hand, tried to parry and slip, ran headfirst into a left kick. Fight's over, essentially. You would think that would make him more wary. But I think he very correctly identified that all these things only work when you treat the sort of emptiness surrounding them as if it is threatening in and of itself. Which it isn't. There's a lot of void around McKee's dangerous, dynamic strikes, which Pitbull, for all that he did relatively little actual striking, spent most of this fight filling. He held his ground. He did not allow McKee to back him up without having to actually commit himself, like I said. And then all that time that they were sort of just squaring off in open space, it was Pitbull feinting. It was Pitbull picking away with more attritive strikes. It was Pitbull just trying to make himself a presence in the fight even when he wasn't committing himself to strikes. And McKee, like, did he feint at all? He did the, like, Rashad Evans, like, pawing thing with his right hand an awful lot. But that's not a feint. You don't have to respond to that. So Pitbull just didn't let him, he didn't like boss himself around while tricking himself into thinking that it was McKee doing that. He was like, if you want to push me around, you're going to have to actually push me around. And McKee didn't know how to do it. So, yeah, standing his ground. It worked a treat.
Yep. And low kicking with or against, I think McKee did actually make him genuinely uncomfortable, because it sort of left him pretty concerned that he wouldn't be able to brace on his front foot. But yeah, other than that, I think it was really just like, paradoxically, it was the fact that Pitbull fought from further away against the tall guy.
Yeah.
That he was just like, I'm going to be able to close the distance after this guy throws. Mm-hmm. And I can back out of enough of the kicks that he'll get discouraged from throwing them. And it worked.
Yeah, just barely. I mean,
he was able to dart in and back away. Like just a really brutish form of a Volkanovski short guy against tall guy.
Absolutely. That is actually a very good comparison. But for a lot of the same reasons, it worked. Mm-hmm. It's just a much lower output, less assertive version of what Volkanovski does to these similar kinds of fighters. 100%. Yeah, that was it.
Scoring. I mean, as we were saying before, like, before the call, was it Big John McCarthy had some insane scoring for this?
He thought that McKee had won round 3. That was the most troubling part, because the fight was quite close.
Just inexplicable.
I think I gave Pitbull the first 3 rounds, if I recall correctly.
I remember. I think none of the rounds are particularly clear, apart from round 3.
Yeah, well, and round 5, McKee had a good round in round 5.
Yeah. I mean, even that is quite competitive as far as I can recall. But yeah, like round 3 is the one where McKee gets dropped and then like spends like a minute in a guillotine.
Yeah, a really tight guillotine, by the way.
Yeah, like it's not like he's holding on to this because he got taken down kind of thing. It's like, oh, you can see his eyes and they look very bad, like they look kind of bloodshot and panicked.
McKee's eventual escape was literally in a moment of like he was panicking because he was about to be submitted. And he
it's super weird. Big John is not only as it turns out, not only an absolutely atrocious commentator, but also a horrific judge.
Oh my God. Yeah, because we discussed this before the show. He also was of the opinion, according to a commenter on our YouTube channel last week, that Petr Yan clearly won the first round against Aljamain Sterling. Which is baffling to me. I'm willing to concede that was a close round. Even though, in review, I'm like, no, Sterling won it. Like, you just kind of have to give it to him. I'm still willing to concede. Close round, you want to call it a draw round. Nothing particularly significant happens, whatever. Clearly, Petr Yan's is a little strange to me. More than a little strange.
Big John, a sort of dispiriting Renaissance man of modern MMA things. Like, is there anything this man can't not do?
Oh, I continue to be baffled. Does anyone like Big John in that role? Why is he still there? It seems the only people who talk about him are complaining about him. I don't get it.
It is super weird.
And it's not like Goldberg. He doesn't have like the charm of a bad. He's not entertainingly bad. He makes you want to go to sleep and then have a somehow dreadful but very boring nightmare. Oh. Yeah. Very perplexing. Very perplexing.
Aaron Pico.
Yeah, I just want to quickly reiterate my offer to a friend of the show, Ryan Wagner, who has volunteered to take Big John's judging and refereeing course and insult him and tell him that he's wrong. So I will once again say,
hell yes! Is there a Patreon or something?
That's what I'm saying. We need to let's get a kitty going. Let's all pitch in and get Ryan to that course so that he can just sort of dryly tell Big John that he's an idiot. You know. I
was thinking, like, is there anyone meaner that we could send? And you know what?
That's kind of it.
I don't think there is. The only person I could possibly think of that might be funnier would be Kyle. But
Kyle would be a different kind of funny. I'm with that too.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I think due to like the location restraints, that it might be even more expensive. But maybe that's a stretch goal.
Yeah. Do I want somebody to just sort of just like straight-facedly and calmly tell Big John that he's stupid, or do I want a noisome British man to yell the word slag at him several times? That's the question here.
Both appealing.
Both appealing. All right, guys, duke it out between yourselves. Aaron Pico, you said, Phil. What about Aaron Pico?
He's a really weird prospect because once again we have him honestly destroying someone that he should really just destroy, and also being a fighter who looks simultaneously amazingly impressive and also and you're like, wow, he's still a very young prospect, and you're like, wow, he has so many technical gifts. He has like punching form and punching power, and he's a good natural grappler and so on. And then you're like, man, he have all this stuff when he first came to Bellator.
Yep.
Like, man, does he kind of look the same? Is that he still just throws his incredibly violent offense and just expects the opponent to be cowed by it? I think the best analogy that you came up with before the call is that you compared him to Dennis Bermudez, and I think that is a great call.
Yeah, well, the book on Dennis Bermudez for me was always that he's like my archetype of an all offense or all defense fighter. Mm-hmm. He's a tunnel vision fighter. And Dennis Bermudez, like Aaron Pico, great athlete and really quite a good technician, like pretty damn good at everything. And super powerful and all these things. And you even have to praise these guys for being durable. Like, again, I don't think people have said Aaron Pico's got a bad chin. I'm not convinced of that yet. I think, like Dennis Bermudez, The problem is that when he's throwing, he can't even conceive of the idea that somebody might hit him back. He's just not prepared for return fire. And these are the moments when we have seen Aaron Pico rattled, is when he's going after somebody, trying to kill them, and they just have to touch him on the chin, and he's utterly blind to it. And those are the shots that hurt you no matter how durable you are. If you actually have no idea you're about to get hit, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah. Like, when you looked at Bermudez, especially sort of, I think, mid-UFC career Dennis Bermudez, you could be like, there'd just be points where you'd just be like, wow, that is a genuinely good striker.
Yeah.
You know, he would be working behind a jab. He'd be throwing combinations, ending with kicks, like level changing. You'd just be like, wow, he looks super fluid, but he looks super fluid in the way that like many fighters look great on the bag. And you realize that that's sort of some kind of mentality that they have, is that so, like they get into a mindset where they're like, the opponent is the bag.
Yep.
And then suddenly just like a fist comes flying out of it and just knocks them spark out.
Yeah, usually when people drag out the old Bruce Lee, board no hit back canard, that's when somebody actually is hitting the bag. Right?
Yeah.
These are two fighters who seem to have that exact mentality of just getting to unload. And yeah, I think
it would have added a lot to Enter the Dragon if O'Hara had been holding up the board and then suddenly just like a fist had flown out of it.
Yeah.
And just knocked him out instantly.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee would have to be like, well, I'm not getting my vengeance this time. But yeah.
I think that's the summation of Aaron Pico's issue at this point. I really think that is the main thing, is that, cause it's not like there are admittedly sparing, but there are some moments where Aaron Pico is thinking defensively, and it's not like he can't see stuff coming and get out of the way. But he can't do both at once. And I don't really know what the best method is to solving that, or if it is, as it was for Bermudez, just the kind of thing that always stays with you forever. I'll have to rack my brain next time Pico fights. I would love to come prepared with like some comparisons of fighters who got over that. Cause these are not the only people who have this sort of offense on, defense off tunnel vision.
Yeah. Cause Pico is a not unique experiment. He is a rare experiment in being someone who is in a good weight class in a high tier MMA organization,
mm-hmm.
who's basically been there from the beginning of his career.
Yeah.
He's not unique, and there are fighters who have made tremendous successes out of this.
Mm-hmm.
We've just been talking about AJ McKee. AJ McKee has, he's got a couple years more on his career than Pico does. I think he's like 7 years in, and Pico's about 5. In many ways, looks technically like a much less developed fighter than Pico. Like if you had to say what McKee is better at than him, you'd have to be like, well, he's a better submission grappler, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's just the fact that he just knows how to compete, and he knows how to be aware of what the opponent is doing in a more significant way, and he's grasped that all the way up to the Patricio Pitbull level, which is basically
the top.
At worst the second top tier of second or third to the top tier of MMA in the world. Pico isn't there yet, and the other example of that is obviously I think Peter Yan, who was in ACB almost immediately,
mm-hmm.
and honestly never looked anything but like an absolute freakish monster.
Right.
So I mean, it is just one of these things. Is that we've mentioned it a lot about young prospects. Is that people are always like, someone gets into the sport young, that means they're going to develop super fast. They're going to be amazing when they get older. And if you look at someone like Pico, you would expect him to have the skill base to progress quickly. But That isn't always the case.
It's just
because apart from anything else, when you're that age, you are learning very quickly. Mm-hmm. That should be the age at which you are making your biggest leaps.
Yeah, and I can't even really critique the promotion. Like, it's not like he's been matched unfairly. Huh? He did get rushed into like fighting a serious, experienced journeyman really early into his career. But like since then, he's had plenty of opportunities, as you said, plenty of matchups that he's just supposed to win, and he's been winning them in ways that you expect. But I don't. It has to come from him and his camp. Like it's a difficult thing to solve if there is any straightforward solution to. I don't know. Maybe it just has to come out of sparring or something. Like we got to restrict Aaron Pico to just round upon round upon round of very light sparring, where he just turns the tension off. Like, he needs flow sparring. This is the thing that AJ McKee has that Pico does not. He does not flow. I think that's the main thing. There's a lot of tension, and he can convince you he's a flowy fighter because he chains things together so well. He's got all these wonderful sequences. In a fight like this, we'll see like jab to the head, body jab, feint, step in behind that, right hand, left hook. Like, these are all really good sequences of shots and feints strung together. But you can tell that the lack of fluidity makes itself apparent when somebody just like decides to dig in and swing back, and he's not ready for it, and he can't adjust course mid combination. So yeah, maybe that's it.
Alternatively, he could just spar really hard all the time and just learn how to pour more offense on and just get used to getting punched in the head.
I suppose so. But I think the main thing is he needs to, like, in addition to not seeing shit coming, the tension is related, I think, to how chinny he appears. Like, the guy's got.
So I think, if he just gets beaten up a whole bunch,
maybe.
Maybe he'll just. I mean, the classic example. Because I was thinking about this. If another example of someone who was brought into a very strong promotion when they were super young, Charles Oliveira.
Yeah. True.
Would you? You can very much see that Charles Oliveira is pretty much the same guy that he was when he came to the UFC. But things which were crippling problems back when he first arrived are obviously not anymore. But they're still there.
Sure.
He's still, very defensively vulnerable and upright and all this other kind of stuff. It's just that nowadays he gets cracked in the face, and then he's just like, man, I'm just going to pour on more offense until you go away.
Yeah, I mean, one way or another, all an MMA career is just a series of, like, learned coping mechanisms. People don't ever really, like, in the same way that real people in real life don't ever, like, they very rarely solve their issues. Most of these things are innate, but you learn to work around them or work with them. So yeah, it's either you try to mitigate it by getting Aaron Pico to chill the fuck out, or you just say, oh, you're an insane Wolverine. We're just gonna let you do that until you finally figure out how to just hold it together, with the understanding that you will inevitably get hit hard and rocked in like every high level fight.
Yep. I mean, unfortunately, I think that's probably given what we know of MMA fighters and people in general, that's probably his more likely route to actual MMA success. It's just like, lean into the strengths harder. Don't try and ameliorate the weaknesses. That's for losers.
Yeah. Well, still an interesting fighter. It's just hard to think of somebody where there is this clear feeling that they are not progressing, while also just the level they came in at just being so amazingly impressive that you have to just keep paying attention to them and caring about them.
That's the thing, is that it will take such a small turn, I think.
It could go wrong too. Like, another fighter who seems to fit this bill is like Mirsad Bektic. And Bektic got broken over the course of his career. So, sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably he's naturally a grittier guy than Bektic. But that is, I think, one of the more, concerning lessons, I guess, for someone like, he's one of the more cautionary tales for someone like Pico.
All right. Well, let's wrap up this segment. When we come back, I think we are going to look at Amanda Lemos versus Jessica Andrade. And then probably just only time for a few brief words about that Errol Spence fight. We will absolutely be talking if it happens. And once again, if you listen to the sardonic sage, Ryan Wagner, just don't expect Spence versus Crawford to ever happen. That's probably the wise approach, this being boxing, and that does tend to happen. But still, if it comes about, we will definitely spend a big chunk of time talking about Errol Spence. Anyway, those two things after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, folks, welcome back to Heavy Hands, segment 3, and that means Lemos versus Andrade, our upcoming UFC Fight Night main event. And, I don't know, Phil. Maybe we have mixed feelings on this one. It's a very interesting fight. I was just saying that I think there's a non-insignificant chance that Andrade rushes in and gets KO'd really quickly like she did against Weili Zhang. Just knowing now that that's a possibility, I think Amanda Lemos is the kind of fighter who is going to respond to all-out aggression with at least a few bursts of all-out aggression.
Yeah.
But also it's probably a more complicated and messier fight than that. I don't think it's I don't think most women are going to just KO Andrade just because it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things about this is that it's obviously just an insanely violent matchup.
For sure.
This is 100% that was one of these things I was thinking about, right, is that we've had reason to praise the UFC for some of their fight night matchmaking, at least for the main events lately. And you know, they've been doing things like making bantamweight main events, you know, the Aldo Font and so on. Mm-hmm. And I think this is I think Luque Muhammad, you know, whatever it ended up being, was a good main event.
Yeah.
And this is also like, it is relevant and it's exciting and it's really exactly what you should want, right, from a UFC fight night.
100%.
And then, as if to prove that they don't need my approval or anything other than that, the UFC then booked Rosenstruik. Is it Rosenstruik Volkov and Vieira Home as main events?
Did they
as
really?
If to spit in my face and kick me in the balls.
Rosenstruik.
We're not
Volkov.
here to please you.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That is dreadful. The both of those are fucking dreadful.
I know, right?
Terrible main events.
I mean, I was going to say pick which one's worse, but it's obviously Rosenstruik. It's always Rosenstruik.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get back to it. This is actually fantastic.
Great main
and as you said, Lemos, I think it's an interesting question for this one, is that she ended up getting drawn into a bit of a dogfight with Hill. I think she acquitted herself very admirably. This certainly wasn't any kind of like Claudia Gadelha kind of performance where
no,
she's just clearly a 1 and a bit round fighter.
No, you could take what you want away from this, but the comparison that jumped to my mind was probably no one even remembers this fight, but Cody Garbrandt fought Henry Briones.
Oh yeah,
that was like his first UFC fight. When he had just been tooling everyone, where he just couldn't put the guy away. And there was like a moment of concern and looking a bit ragged. And then I was impressed at the time because he kind of, collected himself and just won the fight.
Yep.
And Lemos sort of did the same thing here. She couldn't put Hill away. I think she kind of blew her wad a bit trying to go for a finish early. Hill is just an incredibly scrappy, surviving fighter, incredibly difficult for anyone to put away, and then made her very uncomfortable in the clinch. And I was impressed by the way that Lemos became a mess and then pulled herself back together and proceeded to win the fight.
Mm-hmm. And it's not entirely dissimilar to Andrade's own fight with Hill.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, it was arguably a bit better, because Hill just kind of did better and better the longer the fight went on against Andrade. Lemos kind of started to have problems and then kind of got herself back into it.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, this is one of those ones where, well, okay, I think one of the, and I think the fight does sort of hinge on the fact whether Hill knocked Lemos down with that elbow in the third, and I think in retrospect she actually didn't. So yeah, she probably should have lost that fight. But so one of the interesting things I find about this one is also like not necessarily just the dynamic of Andrade is going to go after her and get punched in the face super hard almost immediately. But also, like, what does Andrade look like back at strawweight? I'm never a fan of like ping-ponging back down to a division when you're old. I can think of very few examples where it's worked. I mean, or at least when you're like a veteran, someone who's gone up a division then goes back down again.
Yeah, what was her reason for going up? Was it just to chase a title when she felt, or was was it a physical thing?
I mean, I'm assuming it was to chase a title, but given that she started at bantamweight,
yeah,
I can't imagine strawweight is tremendously easy on her.
No, although I don't recall her ever having any issues with it. It seemed like such a shocking drop.
It's just a general thing. I don't think people's bodies like doing this.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't think Jessica Andrade's body is a typical person's body. I'm just going to say that. I think she's a fucking tank who is just made of muscle and bones. And I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, just given that she already had a very successful career in which, like, she was, I mean, already at strawweight, if it was a hard cut, she was insanely durable, insanely well conditioned. She didn't seem to suffer any of the consequences you would expect from somebody having a hard time making weight. So,
I mean, it mentioned it before, but the fact that she was able to basically not do anything like win the round, but have her best round against Joanna Jędrzejczyk of all people after just 4 rounds of getting her ass kicked.
Yeah,
was just one of the most purely physically impressive things I've seen anyone do.
Yeah, just an unchanging performance from her, really, where she just kept at it, even though horrible things were happening to her face and body the entire time. So I'm going to assume we get more or less the same Andrade. With the caveat that, of course, that same Andrade was KO'd instantaneously by Weili Zhang.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm going to say one major reason I'm not going to pick that to happen is something that we definitely saw revealed in the fight with Hill. Lemos herself is not a great clinch fighter, which is where a lot of Weili Zhang's initial damage was set off. Andrade,
yeah, because we've mentioned this before, is that Andrade is like a technically genuinely quite bad clinch fighter who is simply she's actually like, I think she's become a reasonably decent striker now. But it's just the fact that her clinch is really just like knee strong. Yeah.
Be strong. And she also, this can be a problem because she invariably ends up in the clinch. She's like Sean Porter, the boxer, who just like, she's just flings herself forward. There is no conception of like distance management or like not crowding your strikes. I mean, on the one hand, it's very difficult for her to crowd her strikes. She's got these short, stumpy little arms, that she can just smash into people and still do damage. And that's how she fights. So it could be a problem, but, notably, Angela Hill beat both of these women in the clinch. Both of whom looked relatively kind of Andrade less passive, but also like easier to outfox. Lemos a little like less utterly reckless, but also didn't really know how to gain an advantage in the clinch. So I'm going to go ahead and assume if I were to predict the exact same kind of KO Wei Li Zhang found, I would be making a mistake based on that.
I also think that Andrade has, as we said, I think she's improved as a striker, and I think she is less someone who will just charge forward because she doesn't think that anything the opponent could possibly do could hurt her. I think the performance she had against Calvillo is at least somewhat, but also the one she had against Namajunas is.
Phil, I can't believe you're saying this.
I praised that fight many times. And her approach.
So you say.
I think she's harder to hit in neutral space. She doesn't just barrel after people and commit as soon as they're in range. She generally waits for them to throw before she can counter it, and then she will often throw in combination when they do that. And this is in fact exactly what got Lemos like briefly stunned by Angela Hill, who is not a big puncher.
Yeah.
That she was put up against the cage, threw back, and then Angela Hill threw a two-piece and caught her with the second punch. This is all very Jessica Andrade stuff, especially modern Jessica Andrade. Who, like I said, might have been more willing to just come in swinging before. There's now, I think, much more of a patient like pressure counter fighter. Can still be diffused in lots of ways. A genuinely good out fighter, or just like a genuinely committed and physically on par wrestler would probably both take care of her fairly easily, but there aren't that many of them. So I think just the directionality of the fact that like Lemos putting herself up against the cage almost immediately in the Hill fight. She was much better at it later on, at sort of holding ground and fighting in center cage. Just that, I think, is going to be Andrade is quite good at dealing with that now. She throws arcing strikes to cut people off. She punches the body, and she doesn't have that first layer of just being free punches to the face anymore.
Yeah.
Trickier problem to solve, if the same fundamental one.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think you gotta be, you just have to be really fucking good to get away with backing yourself into a corner against Andrade. Because you're gonna have moments, and maybe she can do something big with those moments, because she hits like a truck, Lemos. She's probably one of the hardest hitting people in the entire division, if not the best, just pure puncher. But she also, unlike somebody like say Rose Namajunas, does not have the depth of like connected layers to that kind of back foot fighting, where she lands a good shot and then she's getting herself instantly, without even thinking about it, to a better position, getting herself out of the corner. She will just sort of stand there and swing back if an exchange is offered to her, and she'll get hit in those exchanges too. And I know they have very different frames and styles and everything, but if you have any of those exchanges you had with Angela Hill with Jessica Andrade, you're going to be having a much worse time. Even if you're having the same success, you're not going to be having as much fun just getting to land what are clearly the harder shots between the two of you. And I think that is very much compounded by Andrade's willingness to hit the body. Maybe she doesn't have the reach, but she's going to get in there and actually hit targets that Lemos is not prepared to defend. This was also a big part, again, very different frame, but also a big part of Lemos's UFC debut loss to Leslie Smith, who just, got in her face, hit her body, exhausted her. It was also, I think, a Lemos who was in much worse shape. But yeah, I'm gonna go
also,
with...
you know something else weird about this fight?
What's that?
Lemos is 4 years older than Jessica Andrade.
That is strange.
She is 34, and Jessica Andrade is only 30.
Wow.
despite the fact that Andrade has had a longer and much more packed MMA career.
Yeah, no kidding. Man, Andrade's had 31 fights in like 11 years.
Mm-hmm. Even back in the, her bantamweight era, she was the I guess the brave Brazilian of that particular era, where people would just be like, who wants to fight? And she'd just be like, me.
I'll take it. Yeah. So I'm going to take Andrade, assuming she's the same strawweight she was. Assuming Lemos will not yet have solved the issue that still kind of plagued her in that Hill fight and has plagued her before. You don't want to get backed into a corner and have no choice but to exchange with Andrade, who will A, hit your body, B, take you down. This is another big difference between her and Weili Zhang, by the way. She doesn't have the wrestling. So yeah, I'm taking Andrade.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just hoping that I hope we get two-way traffic. I don't actually, as much as it's cool to watch Andrade do her thing, I don't really want to watch her just, crush someone into the fence and knock them out again.
No.
I've seen it a few times. I would really like to see I think we can get a really cool war out of this one.
Yeah. Even if it's just all crammed into like 4.5 minutes. I want to see some back and forth violence. And I think I agree, there's a high chance of that. All right. So, last thing, I guess I'll just say a couple things about, last weekend's boxing event, which is a bit of a shame because, as I said, best fight of the weekend by a long shot compared to the Bellator and UFC main events. Both of which, by the way, had some good undercard action. There were actually quite a few exciting Bellator prelims and quite a few exciting fights on the UFC undercard, which just seemed to like fizzle out entirely in terms of momentum up to the main event, which I think added to the idea of it being very, very boring. But Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas was a really, really interesting and entertaining fight. Errol Spence, I think, one of his most aggressive fights in a little while, which is saying something because he is known as just a patently aggressive fighter. And it was kind of one of my favorite kind of matchups because it was Spence trying to get inside and land body shots and put combinations together, and Ugas trying to stay defensively tight and land pinpoint counterpunches. And for a little while, honestly, for the first maybe half of the fight, it was reasonably close. Spence was landing a lot more, or was throwing a lot more, but they were landing at more or less the same clip through like the first 3 or 4 rounds. Ugas being really accurate. It was an uppercut festival. It was a delight for fans of the uppercut and all uppercut-like punches. Because that was where a lot of these, is that a concise sentence, Phil? Is that a good way of saying that?
Yep.
I should write ad copy for uppercuts.
If you like uppercut type punches, you came to the right place.
Well, some people quibble. Some people will be like, oh, it's a shovel punch. It's a blah, blah, blah. It's all uppercuts to me. Errol Spence, of course, has a fantastic uppercut. He has a variety of fantastic uppercuts. In fact, he throws a tremendous left uppercut to the body, which the rear hand uppercut to the breadbasket has always been one of my favorite punches. I think a lot more fighters could benefit from using it. It sets up things really well. It sneaks in really well. Ugas, the same from the orthodox stance. Great uppercut to the body. And I actually particularly like the way he throws his uppercuts. They were really, really effective counters, both because, they come very quick. He doesn't drop his hand and like overload. It's just sort of pulls the elbow back and snaps it in. But also, they worked so well on the counter because they caught Spence even when he thought he saw them coming and started to draw back, because he does a really good job of extending on the uppercut. It's not a straight up and down punch the way Ugas throws it. It is a diagonal upward and outward shot. So it kind of follows you if you see it coming and try to lean away from it. And
this was just a real like digging fight in general, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was both men just trying to drop their level below the other guy.
Yes.
And then come up from underneath.
And I love boxing infighting.
It's such a weird thing to see that. Because normally that kind of dynamic is reserved for one half of the style matchup. But it's interesting to see something like that play out in a fight which is essentially like pressure and aggression against counterpunching.
Yeah, and it's kind of what should happen, I think, when two guys are agreeing to have a close range fight, because there are things you can do being the taller guy with the taller position. Like obviously your uppercuts can work really well against a guy who keeps crouching, but if you want to stop him from pushing you back and just exploiting like the wide open target of your body, you have to match his level. And then it becomes this sort of game where you're both trying to maintain that leverage advantage by getting down underneath your opponent like a wrestler would, but then you're also both trying to punish the other guy doing it with your uppercuts and body shots. So yeah, it was a really fun, like, back and forth positional battle, which sounds boring, so I will add that there were lots and lots and lots of punches being thrown.
And it was very violent, and both guys got hurt multiple times, and one guy got his eye hideously broken at the end of it.
Ugas's face was really messed up by the end. I gotta point out the one potential turning point of the fight, which was quite strange, and I'm still trying to kind of figure out what happened. In round 6, Ugas hurt Spence.
Was this the mouthpiece thing?
Yes. Yeah, so he slipped or rolled under a right hook in very close range, and then popped up with a really quick and hard uppercut. Really nice counter. It didn't land super clean. It kind of caught the edge of Spence's jaw and yanked his mouthpiece out. But Spence had been apparently hurt by a very short right counter just before that, which, like he was throwing a big left hook and a little punch inside. Didn't even look like much, but it sent him stumbling back on some very unsteady legs. And maybe that explains the fact that, like, right there in the middle of an exchange, I found Spence's reaction very strange. Because when I first saw it, I didn't see the mouthpiece come out. I thought he was hurt. I was like, oh, he's like, he turned away. He's not sure where he is.
I mean, he probably was, to be fair.
That's what I'm saying. Is like, you look at it in replay and he's following the mouthpiece. But that's not when you do that, especially not when you're like an experienced pro like Errol Spence. There's a guy still punching you.
I mean, I think, people just do weird things when they're hurt, I think is the explanation.
Right. That's all I'm saying is he had to be actually hurt.
Yeah, I think he probably almost certainly was. A tiny little moment of Chandler Brooks.
Yeah.
Where the person just thinks they're somewhere completely different.
Yeah. You suddenly start like thinking about like rules or something in the middle of the fist fight.
Or like Bisping Silver for that matter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a very good comparison. So he had to be hurt is my main point. And the only like really big damper on this is just my chance to talk shit about Lawrence Cole. I can't honestly say who is my least favorite boxing referee. Honestly, I'm not sure I could say who's my least favorite MMA referee. But given that Herb Dean had yet another very good standing stoppage last weekend at the UFC event, Lawrence Cole takes the title for shittiest referee of the weekend just for this one, like, 30-second sequence. First of all, when Spence goes after the mouthpiece and gets hurt on the chin, that's a knockdown. I don't know. I haven't even heard many people complaining about this. The guy gets hit and goes reeling into the ropes and bounces off of them and he would have fallen over without the ropes. That should be a knockdown. In the midst of this, the referee is like already like in the fucking way. I think he says stop because he sees the mouthpiece come out even though they're still exchanging. And I think this causes Ugas to not follow up on Spence after he hurts him. Because he's strangely, like, passive after he sees Spence go reeling into the rope. He doesn't jump on him. And then, he then starts pressuring Spence, He's hitting his body. He's trying to open him back up, knowing that he's been hurt. And the referee breaks the fight. Like, Spence's back is to the ropes. Ugas is working with the jab. And then the referee steps in to replace the mouthpiece, giving Spence precious time to recover his senses. Very badly handled, is all I want to say, by Lawrence Cole. I think he had a too big impact on the fight. But still, otherwise, fantastic performance from Errol Spence, and you got to give the guy credit that he was just not deterred. Like, within the same round, maybe benefiting from the mouthpiece break, back to pressuring, back to hitting the body, and just longer and longer, more ruthless combinations the longer the fight went on. He's a rough and tumble fighter, man, and I really like his style of infighting, and I really hope they make a fight with Terrence Crawford.
Yeah, the monkey paw will close upon hearing that wish.
It's cursed.
You will get it.
Terrence Crawford.
15 years from now.
Okay, so that's Heavy Hands for the week. Hope you guys enjoyed this mixed bag of an episode, trying to cover a bunch of different bases. What do we got coming up next week? On the UFC front, we'll be looking back at Lemos Andrade. It's not a terrible undercard, so hopefully there will be more stuff to talk about there. But we will, of course, be devoting most of our attention to the week following, which has Rob Font versus Chito Vera in the main event, which I'm very excited for.
Which is, yes, another fantastic bantamweight action fight.
And we may even have to, is there another week off at all between there? No, there isn't. So we may even have to devote a bonus episode in advance or some of that episode to covering the absolutely jam-packed UFC 274, which is coming after Font versus Vera. So, good stuff on the horizon. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. Find us on Patreon. Oh yeah, there's some bonus stuff up there recently. Not this week, but there was some stuff from last week. If you haven't heard it already, it was like an hour of us talking about undercard stuff and also previewing Muhammad Luque, which I think we were pretty accurate even though our pick was wrong, which I guess is the ideal for this show. Getting all the predictions wrong, but mostly nailing the specifics. $3 a month, Patreon, yada, yada, yada. Oh, yeah, find Phil on Twitter at Eva Greg Jackson. Find me at Boxing Bush. That's it. I don't know why. I'm really flagging here to the finish line. You know, you just sit there and just fucking watch me drowning.
Yeah, I don't want you to pull me down with you.
Phil Collins ought to
just drown and get it over with.
Phil Collins ought to write a scathing song about you. All right, that's it, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Sorry, that's my impression of someone.